iPhone 17 versus the iPhone 6S 10 years later. Let's see how much of a difference 10 years makes in iPhone land. So what is up, guys? Nick here, helping you to master your technology. And today we're going to talk about something you probably didn't expect, a 10-year later comparison between the iPhone 6S and the iPhone 17. Now, let's first talk about the price points, because 10 years ago, the iPhone 6S, and I kind of miss those white fronts. Do you miss these white front displays? They were definitely unique at the time. A lot of phone makers weren't really doing white front displays, so Touch ID integrated right there. You know, the bezels were thick, but it kind of gave it a unique, like when you seen the white front, you knew that was an iPhone. Let me know if you agree with that down below. But back in 2015, when this came out, it was $649 for a 16 gig. Now that sounds laughable today when you talk about the storage at that price, but adjusted for inflation, here is something you might not have expected. The iPhone 17 in 2025 is actually cheaper than the iPhone 6S at $799. So what I mean by that? Well, the 6S, if you adjust for inflation, the same purchasing power in 2025, the iPhone 6S would have cost, if this was for sale today and you adjust for inflation, $882. So this phone actually at the time would actually have costed more than the 17. So the technology has gotten cheaper, it's gotten more efficient and better, and it's also costing you less overall. Again, adjusted for inflation. If you look at the full numbers, $799, $829, and then you look at the 6S at $649, you would think it's cheaper, but not really. This phone would have cost more back then. So that's the first thing. Price differences at launch. The 17 is a much better value here with a way better overall device as well. So let's talk about the design differences. Let's see how much different a design it is. So first of all, right off the bat, they did have the classic silent switch right over there. And now they have the action button in its place. They also had thinner overall design and more rounded at the corners and also smaller buttons. If you kind of look at the iPhone 6S and then you look at the brand new iPhone Air, it's actually kind of similar. These older iPhones were nearly as thick as the new iPhone Air, which is being praised for how thin it is. But it's being praised for how thin it is and how much power it has combined with how thin it is. But you could see they already had phones this thin back in the day. However, they didn't come with huge displays on the front and all the power you get with an iPhone Air. But if we take a look at the design on the front, you can see they totally got rid of the whole overall bezels. Touch ID right here is totally gone. And a lot of people still like to use the iPhone SE 3rd generation to kind of still get this memorable Touch ID right here. But this design carried on, well all the way into like a couple of years ago. So definitely it stood the test of time. Now, if you take a look here on the right of the design, you'll see that the power button is significantly smaller on the iPhone 6S 10 years ago. You would actually have to feel that out. This one is so large, it's so easy to find out where the button is. Now, also on the sides, you're going to see no SIM card tray, but they have a camera control button. And people always thought that Apple was going to go to no buttons at all on their phones, but they added one with the camera control. One of the things that has changed significantly is the camera size. Not only are they much sharper and stronger, you could see the camera is incredibly small on the iPhone 6S at this point. As a matter of fact, I would almost bet that the iPhone 6S's camera is about the size of the sensor inside of the iPhone 17. So when you take a look at the overall design elements 10 years later, they have taken the base model iPhones to the moon for sure. Back in this time, though, there wasn't really as many options as there is now. You had like the 6S, the 6S Plus, the SE. Maybe they kept around the 6 Plus and the 6, but it was pretty simple. The lineup wasn't quite as confusing and as many different options and variables as there is today. Another thing that's been significantly improved is the build quality, but also the ability to resist scratching and glass cracking as easily. Now, it still is possible, you know, if you're really reckless, but back in these times, there was mall kiosks just to replace your iPhone screen. I mean, you could walk around a mall and run into like 3 to 5 or maybe even 6 of them in one single mall, because it was a big business to just go ahead and change out your iPhone glass. Now, a lot of iPhone, they still have them, but they're not quite as frequent. I don't see them as much as I did back then. They were everywhere back then because these iPhones were cracking so easy. It was an easy, thing to change the glass, $100 here, $100 there. I mean, everybody had a cracked iPhone back in this time. So these phones definitely cracked quite easily. This one was pretty sturdy. It didn't bend or anything like that because they improved the strength on the 6S from the iPhone 6. That one did bend on the iPhone 6, but at the same time, the overall phone wasn't quite as durable on the front. The aluminum was strong though. You could dent it. You see that little dent right there? You could dent this aluminum, no issue. The camera was small enough that you're not going to crack the lens that easily. But for some reason, some people still found a way to crack their lens, even though it was that tiny. Well, you could rock this caseless, but I still would have recommended a screen protector at this time. And overall, it was pretty solid build. It's just that front glass on these older iPhones easily cracked. Now, the new phone over here, it has the opposite issue. The newer devices, they have all glass on the rear. So if you hit these on the wrong angle, you could crack the back of these phones a little bit easier than back in the day when they were all aluminum. However, the front glass is much more resistant to easy cracking. Like, you're not going to crack this super easy unless you take a really bad fall. But it is possible still. Even with the new ceramic shield too, it's still possible. It's just not that easy to do. So I would say their durability and overall, just 10 years later, they have substantially improved the build quality at, again, a price that would have been cheaper in 2015 when this phone came out. So, you kind of see it year over year, like iPhone upgrade is the same and the same. But when you look at it from a nostalgic perspective, like we're looking at it here, you'll see that we are actually at, like, some people call it peak iPhone. I don't know if I consider it that because they still have a dynamic island, but I would say definitely incredibly mature and substantially closer to like perfect than they ever were before. So definitely a big deal this year with iPhone 17, kind of giving you all of the upgrades, including promotion. That's the funny thing though. Even the iPhone 6S from 10 years ago still scrolls about as smooth as an iPhone 14, 13 because it has 60 hertz. So you wouldn't even actually notice too much of a difference between that display and a brand new iPhone 13 or 14. Now the next one is display differences, and they are immense. Like, they're huge. The display, obviously, you can see is much bigger. That's an obvious one, but the brightness outdoors. Back in these times, you could still see it, but if the sun was strong, you were doing this. You were kind of like this, looking for the screen. 600 or so nits back in this time. It was actually better than a lot of the competing Android devices, and a lot of those started to year over year improve their brightness levels. But at the time, this is the best you could do. The newer iPhones now, they're so bright. Look at, I can overexpose my camera easily right there. That's how bright they get. They get insanely bright. That is a huge update. Also, the reduction of the bezels on the iPhone 10 was a huge deal because you could see right here, the iPhone 6S had these thick bezels up here. They did house the Touch ID and front-facing camera. But overall, I was always ready for that to disappear. So it's been gone for a while, but now, even on their entry-level 17, you have these incredibly razor-thin bezels around the edges. So recommending an iPhone today is much easier than it was back then because, you have the 17 that nearly does as much as what the Pro-level devices and the Plus and the stronger, higher price iPhones used to do back in the day. So incredible deal there. Otherwise, just kind of like using the phone itself, you're going to have a much larger screen to do basic tasks, to do media, to do texting, everything. So, but here's the thing. Back in this time, people use these more as like a communication tool. We still use it at that, but we have advanced beyond that. Now our phones have become these tools that do an immense amount of digital tasks that we were already starting to dive into with the 6S and 6S Plus, but we have taken it to the next level. Now they replaced full-blown cameras with the camera control button, all these different modes they have on there. People buy these phones sometimes just to do social media and just do camera stuff. They've replaced for some people, they can do most of the tablet tasks they would do on these larger, newer phones, especially the Max and stuff like that. And overall, we can just do a lot more things because a lot of applications are much more powerful these days, as well as updated way more frequently and brought out to iPhone when they come out with like a desktop version or a tablet version. They sometimes will also bring it to iPhone. So iPhone is way more powerful today than it ever was before. And then having the inclusion of Apple Intelligence along with enough power to handle many, many AI applications, this thing is an absolute screamer of a device and way, way smarter than the iPhone 6S ever was. The iPhone 6S is basically a communications phone with applications. This is basically a beastly computer in your pocket. And so these days with 8 times the storage as the iPhone 6S. So we do have, well, actually I'm a little bit off there. 256 gigs now is like 16 times the storage. So if we go 16 times 16, 256 gigabytes. So definitely an incredible deal here with the iPhone 17. Obviously, software has seen substantial changes and improvements over the years. But when we take a look at everything you could do, you could only dream about doing customizations that you see now on iPhone. On this phone, you would have to jailbreak and do all this extra stuff that Apple wasn't really fond of. But, you know, some people still did it, and you would have to do all these different things just to get some customization done. That's no longer the case. Nowadays, you can just do stuff right here on the phone, and you probably don't even care to do those things anymore because it's already available, like making the icons bigger, making them, you know, different colors and all these different things you can do with the customization of the tinting. So it's definitely way, way better now than it ever was before in this area. And so that is probably, to me, one of the biggest software changes. Also having way more feature set. I think iPhone has become a bit more complex in the area of the software. I mean, we can make videos all week, all year long, just talking about software features. Although they did have quite a few back then, it was a little bit more simple. While there was some annoying things that they have improved over the years, back in those times, it was just a little bit more simple than it is now. Now we have way more options, way more things to mess around with, the inclusion of Apple Intelligence. I mean, I could spend an hour talking about one section of settings. That's how much we have now on this phone. Next up, we're going to talk about is the camera, because the camera has gotten to the point where, you know, things you could only dream of when the iPhone 16 or the 6S came out. I said 16, that's not even close. What am I thinking? So back in this time, I was always, you know, dreaming of like, let me get an ultra wide camera. Let me get a little bit better overall zoom. These cameras were strong at the time, but they were just very basic. If we go over here to video, you could do 4K 30 and stuff like that. So still strong video at the time, and people were blown away by this because we didn't have this type of video and camera power in a lot of phones. And so this was one of the best out there for the time, and people loved the simplicity of the camera back then. I didn't like how you had to always go into settings for every setting, but if you take a look at the front-facing camera, you know, you can see this is a solid one, but definitely not what we see now. But it shockingly still looks usable. Like you could take a picture and still post today on that phone, and I don't think people would be coming at your picture provided you put a little bit of a sharpness filter, maybe a little bit of a vivid filter. But you could see right here, way more styles, aspect ratios. This is nearly a professional camera right here on the iPhone 17. Slow motion, cinematic mode, spatial video, panoramic. Take a look at the front-facing camera. You can back this thing. This is insanely good. This is a built camera, I think, to last at least 5 years minimum on the base iPhone 17 in this beautiful green color. So yeah, the camera differences 10 years later are superb. It's pretty noticeable. However, if we take a look at the camera here again, like I say, let's flip that around. If I took this picture, this is nowhere near laughable or anything like that. Like, look at that's pretty decent. Okay, I didn't focus that one. Let me focus that one. Okay, there we go. So you can see, again, not the sharpest thing out there, but it's usable. That's a usable image. So Apple's been doing cameras pretty good. And Touch ID does feel pretty good here. This is actually a pretty clicky one as well. You hear that? So a pretty clicky Touch ID right there. So if anybody complains about the battery on the iPhone 17, tell them they don't know what they're talking about. Because if you look at the iPhone 6S and the 6 of these times, these phones were about maybe an 8-hour phone. I was charging these things half the day all the time on the regular 6 and 6S. These were nowhere near as strong of a battery life as the newer phones. These phones now, they feel like I could just count on them all day long, all the time. And that's for basically all the 17s. The iPhone Air, if I push it a little bit hard, I could probably drop that one by like 9 p.m. But other than that, these ones, these were back in the times when you had to have those 5-watt chargers with you all the time. I do miss the headphone jack though. We don't have that no more. The headphone jack, that was a big deal on the iPhone 6s. But yeah, SIM card tray. A lot of people are going to miss some of those things. And you notice they no longer put iPhone badging on there anymore because it became so synonymous. They didn't have to. All they have to do is put an Apple logo. I don't think they're going to take off the Apple logo. That would make the phone look a little generic. But no iPhone logo anymore. A lot cleaner looking on the back. And some people, including me, they're not like these lines on the iPhone 6s days. Not a big fan of those. So a lot cleaner that they put the antenna lines on the side of the phone now. And you don't think about this probably too much, but the audio, you might take this for granted, is substantially stronger on the newer phones with these dual speaker setups. It's just way, way better. Back in these times, the audio on the 6S Plus was strong for the time. But nowadays it's got a much more rich and louder sound to it that it just sounds amazing. Comparatively to an older phone. MacBook speakers are still booming over iPhones, but these iPhones are solid. You can play them. You can play songs on them, on the kitchen counter, on the table, whatever you do, wherever you play music at, and it's going to sound pretty good. Even if there's a room full of people, they're probably going to enjoy whatever you're playing on there. So, and back in this time, you could do the same thing. It was just a little bit more tinny, and you probably were going to go get a Bluetooth speaker. People still are using Bluetooth speakers. I'm not saying they're not popular still, but they were kind of needed with the older iPhones because they didn't sound as good as they do now. For example, I could rock just the iPhone and the speaker sounds good enough to play music without having to bring the Bluetooth speaker. Granted, if I do have a big party going on, whatever, I'm going to use a Bluetooth speaker to get even better audio. But the iPhone 17, you could see 10 years later, a substantial improvement in that area as well. Also, some basic things like network performance, Wi-Fi performance. There was actually more issues with people dropping calls back in these times, having weaker than they wanted performance. Of course, you didn't have 5G like you do have it now back in these times. So the iPhones are just much faster now to connect to all of those things and to just do your simple phone tasks. They're actually better phones as a phone too. Not just, it's a better, it got faster internet, Nick, duh. No, they're actually better to just be a regular smartphone, just a phone, like make calls. You're just not dropping them as much. The consistency is superbly better for sure. Now, the special features difference is also, we have things like crash detection. iPhone can detect the crash, like call 911. That is something else. The iPhone 17 can also do emergency SOS via satellite text messaging as well. Things that you would never even imagine. These are features that you probably didn't even know you needed at this time. And you probably we hope you don't need them. They're not features you want to use, but they're there in case of that unforeseen event. So it could be life changing in an unfortunate event. We don't wish that on nobody. We don't want none of that to ever happen. So I'm just saying though, that this phone, you would have to hit the phone dialer, make your call, do whatever you got to do. It's just a little bit more tedious. This is a lot more safer of a device to keep on your person at all times. So final verdict is in after 10 years. I mean, we do comparisons here a lot and we're like nitpicking the fine differences. It's fun. I love to analyze these products. But when we take a look at this, the nostalgia is here. It is here. I do miss some of the old iPhone. I think it was a simpler time. I do sometimes think about Touch ID and why they haven't integrated it yet onto the power button. However, I'm very happy to state that you're just in a much better position than you were before when it comes to the options you do have. I mean, come on, like for the base model, giving you all this 6.3 dynamic island, dual 48 megapixel, 18 megapixel on the front. I think this video should probably make you appreciate a little bit more of what we have when you compare here. The differences are stark for sure. So yeah, that's my nostalgic comparison between the iPhone 17 and the iPhone 6s after 10 years. This was launched in September of 2015. It's 2025, 10 years old, and it still charges. It still works. I'm not updating it though, because I don't want to get slaggy hot performance. So I'll just leave it alone. how it is. Thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I will catch you all in the next episode. Nick here. Be sure to be well and have a great Sunday.